Díomh gach duine tá riméid orm a bheith anseo anuw agus tám anmhaoich as for co-luder. So good evening everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and I'm very grateful to see you all. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about lace this evening. So I'm going to start off by talking about the history of lace and with particular focus of the history of lace in Ireland. So there's 5 styles of lace associated with Ireland, so I'll discuss them. And then I will show you a small presentation of my own arts practice, which basically looks at taking those traditional techniques and then applying them within the context of contemporary art and design. At the end of that discussion, I'll invite you maybe to come a little closer to the table and I can go through all the different styles of lace that we have here in Ireland, but you might understand it a little bit better when you actually see the samples. And then if there's time and if you're interested, I can do a little demonstration of bobbin lace and needle lace. And I also have a carrot and cross lace sample in progress, so I can show how that's also made. And I've got the crochet hook as well, if anybody is interested in seeing a few crochet lace stitches. So does that sound okay with everyone?
That sounds lovely.
Great, okay. So the history of lace, really a kind of a very general overview. What I've discovered since I started researching lace, which was back in 2012, that as soon as you go into any area of lace, you discover a whole world contained within it. So there's just so much out there to learn. So what I'm saying tonight is really just a very general overview. But lace making emerged in Europe in around the 1400s. So we're talking about the 15th century, in the late 15th century. And by the 16th century, Flanders and Italy were the centre of lace making in the world. So lace making emerged from both of those places, from Flanders, which is present-day Belgium, and Italy at the same time. So nobody can really lay claim to ownership over lace. And from there it spread out all over Europe and now really all over the world. So the main 2 types of lace that emerged at that time were bobbin lace and needle lace. So bobbin lace is made from winding threads onto small wooden bobbins. We've got a sample of it over here. And then crisscrossing them back and forth. So it's really a weaving technique, and it came about from the passementerie technique, which is a technique used to make braids or plaits. So that's how bobbin lace emerged. Needle lace began from taking some woven cloth. It was really like drawn thread work, if anybody is familiar with that, and removing threads from some woven cloth and then taking a separate needle and thread and stitching into those open spaces. And what people realised when they started this process, that they were wasting an awful lot of time undoing the work of the weaver. So at that time, everything was done by hand. So you had the weaver who was weaving cloth, and then you had the lace makers coming along kind of undoing their work. So what they did then was develop a system of creating stitches on a support background, which was temporary. And then that temporary structure or support background could later be removed. And in that way, they weren't undoing the work of the weaver and they weren't wasting time. And that's how needle lace developed. So in the 16th century, Flanders and Italy were the centres of lace making, and from there it spread out across Europe. So Ireland was no exception really. In the 1700s, I think we have the earliest documentation of lace making in Ireland, and that's in Headford in County Galway. So Headford in County Galway would have been associated with bobbin lace, which is this lace over here. So they would have had a substantial enough industry in Headford at the time, I think. And don't quote me on the dates, but I think in and around the 1760s, there was 100 women employed as lace makers in the town. So it was quite a significant number, considering Headford is a small area. So we have Headford lace making from the middle of the 18th century, the mid 1700s in Galway, and from the early 19th century, from around the 1820s onwards, we have evidence of carrot and cross lace making in Monaghan and Limerick lace in Limerick. So in 1820, Mr. Charles Walker opened up a factory in Limerick, and he opened up a very, very big factory and employed hundreds and hundreds of women to make lace. So he would have got lace makers from England, very qualified lace makers from England, to come over and teach young women and young girls how to make lace and then pay them not a lot of money. So he was very much from, I suppose, the capitalist perspective. He was interested in employing as many people as possible and as making as much lace as possible, and therefore making as much money as possible. Carrickmacross was slightly different. The industry was started there by a philanthropist, a Mrs. Gray Porter, who was married to the rector of Donaghmoyne, and she began the lace industry in Carrickmacross as a way to generate employment for the local women there. So they would have started making Carrickmacross lace, which is an applique style of lace. So Limerick lace and Carrickmacross lace are similar insofar as they are made on a pre-made, machine-made net. So from 1820 to 1860, there was a thriving industry in Limerick. A lot of women relying on this for survival. And then in 1840, the Great Famine happened. And that really marked the end of the lace industry as we knew it, and really kind of all industry at that time kind of ceased to be. And what happened after that, we see an emergence of needle lace. Now, what was interesting about this is that in Europe at the time, the handmade lace industry was pretty much dying off. But in the 1850s and the 1860s, it was really revived again in Ireland. And one of the reasons for that was the introduction of needle lace. So needle lace is considered a pure lace. It would be similar to bobbin lace in that it's a pure lace. It's made just from thread. So needle lace is made from just a needle and thread. And again, it would have been started by a lot of philanthropists and a lot of religious orders who opened schools all over the country. It was pretty much all over the country needle lace was practiced. So it would have been started by religious orders, and again with the sole aim of creating employment for women and to kind of help the impoverished population at the time. So we're talking about the 1850s, 1860s, people were still starving, and even though the famine was technically over, the effect of the famine was far from over. So again, we've got this industry that was very, very important locally in various counties around the country, with big centres of lace making emerging in around that time. So there was a big lace school in Youghal, for example, and then 2 hours up the road there was another big lace school in Kenmare. And in both of these schools they would have employed a substantial amount of women. There was also, so I suppose needle lace, just to kind of put it straight in your head, needle lace is a style of lace, but within that there are various different designs, I suppose, and different schools would lay claim to different designs. So for example, the lace makers in Youghal felt that they were totally different to the lace makers in Kenmare based on the different designs that they were using, and there might have been variations in stitches as well. So there would have been Inishmack up in Fermanagh, that was another needle lace school and also a style of needle lace, but technically all needle lace is based on the buttonhole stitch. Okay, so am I confusing you, or is everybody? Okay, great, great. So we have a needle lace school in Youghal, we have a needle lace school in Kenmare, there was one in Inishmack Saint in New Ross. They made needle lace as well, and they would have made flat point lace, which was similar to what they made in Kenmare and in Youghal. And they also made grow point lace, which is like a raised, almost three-dimensional lace. And that would have been similar to what was made in Inishmack Saint up in County Fermanagh. And in nearly all the lace schools, they made more than one kind of lace. Okay, so for example, there's the 5 styles of lace. We have Limerick lace, Carrickmacross lace, needle lace, bobbin lace, and crochet lace. And then within, say, needle lace, there's lots of different categories. Within bobbin lace, there's lots of categories as well, but it's not really relevant to the history of bobbin lace in Ireland. It's mainly just a torchon lace that was made here in Ireland. So we have our 5 styles of lace, and they're all made in completely different ways. But for example, Limerick lace emerged in Limerick, but it's also a style of lace. So you don't have to just be in Limerick to make Limerick lace, if that makes sense. They made Limerick lace in Kenmare, they made Limerick lace up the north, and likewise they made Carrickmacross lace in Kenmare. So these different styles of laces were made all over the country, regardless of what they were called. Limerick lace is an embroidery on net. So yeah, technically it's not considered a pure lace. You're using a machine-made lace and you're stitching into it. And Carrick-Macross is an applique style of lace. So you have a machine-made organdy, a machine-made tulle. You've got your pattern underneath. You stitch into the two of these together, and then you cut away the organdy that's no longer needed. So when I show you the samples later on, hopefully this will make a little bit more sense to everybody. You then have crochet lace, which is made with just a crochet hook, a very fine hook, and a thread. So often with crochet, they would have broken the eye of a needle, and that would have been the crochet hook that they used to make their crochet lace. So really the crochet, if you see somebody crocheting a blanket, it's the exact same technique as is used to make crochet lace. The only difference is the fineness of the hook and the fineness of the thread. Okay, so we're talking about really, really tiny threads and tiny, tiny hooks. Bobbin lace, which is over here, you've got threads which are wound onto bobbins, and I mentioned earlier they're crisscrossed back and forth and pinned in place, and that's how you create the tension with the pins, and then the pins are later removed to reveal the lace. And needle lace is made with just a needle and thread on a support backing that's later removed. Okay, is there a lot of information there?
What's Clonus lace then?
Clonus lace is a crochet lace. Oh. So again, crochet lace was made all over the country, but Clonus developed, how you recognize Clonus lace and what makes it Clonus lace is the picot, which is called the Clonus knot, and also, yeah, it's just the picot, it's the picot. And then with Carrick-Macross lace, how you recognize Carrick-Macross lace are the little picots around the edge, and also the use of the pop, which is a little stitch that I'll show you in a little while as well. So again, yeah, good question. Clonus lace is crochet lace. Yeah. Okay. We have, after the famine, the 1850s, the 1860s, a massive needle lace industry emerging. It being made all over the country. We're really excelling at this point as needle lace makers. Handmade lace isn't really being made, or it's not as popular as it used to be in Europe, but in Ireland it's really, really taken off and it's really being pushed. So we have the likes of Lady Aberdeen, who came over in the late 19th century. She was the wife of the Viceroy in Ireland, so a very important person in the country at the time, and she became very involved in creating lots of different social structures to better the kind of conditions, the living conditions and the social conditions of people in Ireland. So she really was from that philanthropic perspective. So she would have entered Irish lace in various different competitions and brought Irish lace abroad and sold it at various different exhibitions in the States, and really kind of pushed Ireland as a country of lace making. Two significant lace events happened in the early 20th century. So in 1906, Lady Aberdeen decided to host a lace ball in the Mansion House in Dublin, and all the elite people at the time were invited to attend. So this was a great opportunity for lace makers at the time, because one of the instructions for everybody who was attending the ball was that they had to wear Irish lace. So you've got the likes of Cleary's selling reams and reams and meters of Irish lace handmade by people all over the country. It creates a lot of employment. Women are making lace here, there and everywhere and selling it. So it's a great event. However, at the time, it was also the early 20th century, and there's a lot of political activism at the time. There's a lot of rise of nationalist and Republican thinking, and even though Lady Aberdeen was a fantastic promoter of the Irish lace industry, she received a huge amount of criticism because, of course, there was a massive disparity between the people who made lace and, of course, the people who bought, promoted and wore lace. And this became kind of even more evident as the political tensions really kind of heated up in the early 20th century. So with that then, in 1911, Queen Mary it was Queen Mary's coronation. So the Unionist ladies in Belfast, a small elite group of ladies in Belfast, decided that for this great occasion, they were going to commission a coronation train for Queen Mary. So the train, when it was finished, measured 4 yards by 2 yards. It was made entirely with needle lace, and the lace makers in Youghal were employed to make it. So just as a kind of a small indication, this is the technique we're talking about. It was this technique that was used to make her train, which measured 4 yards by 2 yards, all with this stitching. So it took 60 women 6 months working day and night to make the train. And Janice Helland, who was a scholar and wrote a lot about Irish lace, worked it out that if somebody was to make it in today's terms, it would take one person 30 years to complete the train. Yeah, using this technique. And it would have been the finest of thread as well, because of course it was for royalty. So the lace makers in Youghal made this fabulous train, and they made a lovely little label for it, Dainta in Éireann, and stitched it into the train and then sent it up to Belfast for the coronation. And when the ladies in Belfast saw this label, they were absolutely horrified and refused to pay the ladies in Youghal, and said that they had to come up from Youghal and remove the label from the train before it could be passed on to the Queen. So you can see how there was a lot of this kind of tension and this division, even in something as innocuous as lace making. So I have wrote about lace making quite a bit as the subject for my undergraduate degree and also for my MA paper, and I really regard lace making as this kind of microcosm of the political and social tensions in Ireland in the early 20th century. And if you look into it, you can kind of see all these absolutely fascinating stories. So really the First World War, which started in 1915, was really the end of the handmade lace industry in Ireland. And although the industry died out, and if you look at the census figures, like you've got, I think at the turn of the 20th century, there was 2,000 women employed as lace makers, and it just drops significantly. And I think in like the 1920s, there was 36 or something like that. But it was the second largest industry in the country at the turn of the 20th century. And this is something that I love to share with people, because it's something that nobody knows. And when I found out about it, I was like, what? How could it have been? How could it have been and nobody knows about this? So that's why I feel very passionate about promoting this kind of aspect of women's history, which I feel has been very, very much overlooked in general. So 1915, First World War arrives, and that's really the end of the lace making industry in Ireland. But it still continues as a kind of a cottage industry, and as I suppose as a hobby within households. And then we have a few kind of revival movements that happen, but also you've got the likes of Sybil Connolly, who in the 1950s and the 1960s, do you all know who Sybil Connolly is? A very famous Irish fashion designer who really wanted to promote the use of Irish lace in her designs. So she would have used quite a lot of Carp & Cross lace, and quite a lot of Limerick lace, and also quite a lot of crochet lace. So in Clondalkin in Dublin, there was a small group of lace makers there who were employed on a full-time basis working for Sybil Connolly, making crochet for her. And the little cottages are still in Clondalkin today at the visitor centre. So if anybody is up there, go and have a look, because they're really nice. But that's another little bit of history that I'm kind of only discovering myself now. So you know, the more you kind of look into lace making, the more you'll see that there's just so much out there to learn. So you've got Sybil Connolly in the 50s and 60s who start using it in her designs. And then in the 1980s, you've got quite a lot of revival movements all around the country. So you've got the likes of Nora Finnegan in Kenmare, who heard about this industry. There was like 3 nuns left in the town who knew about it. So she went to them and they kindly offered to teach her how to make lace, on the proviso that she would then go and teach the other women in the town who were interested how to make lace. You have Maura Traynor up in Clones and Maymo MacDonald, who got together and they revived the Clones lace, crochet lace up in that area. And you also have the likes of Teresa Kelly making Carp & Cross lace, Mary O'Neill down in County Offaly making Carp & Cross lace. So you've got all of these different kind of revival movements that happened in the 1980s, which really kind of was fantastic, because had it not happened, I would be very concerned about whether or not people would actually be still making it now, or whether or not we could still get the information that we can get now by visiting these different centres around the country. So I might at that point just switch over to the screen here and just talk about a little bit about my own practice. Does that sound okay? I'm just going to take a sip of water because my throat is dry. Does anybody have any questions?
Where's that train gone to know that? For the Queen?
Yeah, so the train is actually in the National Museum of Ireland. Yeah, which I think is great. I think it's lovely that it isn't in England and that it's not in Belfast, that it's actually here in the Republic because it was made by people down in Cork. I have never seen it and I don't know, has it been on display, but it's up in the National Museum. So it would be interesting to see whether or not you could even like ask to be shown it, you know, because sometimes they do that. Pardon?
How did we get it back if it went to the UK to be a bridal train?
I don't know.
Did it go? Did she wear it?
She did. It went up to Belfast and it was on display in Belfast for a small while, and then she also had it on display in London, as far as I know, so that people could come in and see it.
Okay.
And I think it was described as something like a very gracious gesture to her women subject folk or something, her subject women folk, something like that. It was very condescending. When I read the quote, I was like, oh my God, like it would kind of enrage you if you were one of the lace makers who made it, you know. But yeah, it's up in the National Museum. Yeah.
And would people have made them like a patchwork quilt and then put all the pieces together? Or?
So with needle lace, I would imagine something of that scale. You might have had different people, and I don't know for definite, but this is how I think it was made, that you would have had some people making motifs, and then you would have had other people joining them together. But it would have been this huge piece that might have sat like 20 women on it, all kind of working on it, you know. And maybe, I don't know, you might be on flowers one day and then the next day you might be on joining them together or something like that. Or if somebody was particularly good, I know with crochet lace, you can be particularly good at making a motif, and somebody else would be particularly good at joining them together, because there's a knack in that. There's a technique in joining them together that not everybody can do. So with crochet lace, everything is made separately, and then you lay it out on a big pattern and then you join them up together. So with the needle lace, I mean, really with needle lace, you draw out your pattern. Like this is just a tiny little example of a butterfly, but you draw it out and then you couch down the outline. And that's how it would have been made traditionally. But possibly with something of that size, it might have been done in sections and then joined up together. Probably it would have been, because it might have been too difficult for so many people to work on it. Yeah, yeah.
Because didn't Diana Spencer have a shamrock on her train?
She possibly did. I'm not sure about Diana Spencer, but I do know that Kate Middleton, who was widely reported as wearing Carrick Cross lace, wasn't wearing Carrick Cross lace. The lace on Kate Middleton's dress was made by machine, the motifs were cut out and they were hand stitched onto the dress. And the makers, who were from the Royal School of Needlework, said that it was a Carrick Cross style of lace because it was an applique lace. But it wasn't Carrick Cross lace, and it's actually completely dissimilar to the process of making Carrick Cross lace. So it's a real bugbear for me, that, yeah. Will I show you some of this?
Please,
Yeah.
please.
So can everybody see this okay? If anybody wants to kind of move a chair closer, feel free. And I'll check that in a minute to make sure I didn't leave anything out. So I first started making lace in 2012. I was studying textile design at the National College of Art in Dublin, and I went to see an exhibition called Lost in Lace in Birmingham, which was an absolutely amazing art exhibition featuring all of these artists and designers from all over the world who just made this amazing, massive sculptural work. And it was all this work that you could kind of see through and that you could walk through. And it really kind of, I suppose, ignited my interest in this thing called lace. And I came back from Birmingham kind of being really interested in it and thinking to myself, this whole lace thing must be great if all of these people are making this work that's so different and it's all kind of somehow based on lace. So I started to research lace at home, and while I was doing that, that exhibition also triggered a memory for me that my mother actually made lace, which I had completely forgotten about. So I now had this kind of sense of ownership over this kind of process that I had never done, because my mother used to make lace. So I kind of felt like I had permission to make it. And so I started to research it, and I came across the Kenmare Lace Centre, and I kind of decided that I wanted to learn how to make lace. If I was going to make artwork based on lace, I should at least learn how to make lace to have some kind of basic understanding of it. So I wrote to Nora Finnegan in the Lace Centre and asked her would she teach me. So I went down and spent 4 months there, basically doing an internship with her and learning how to make Kenmare lace, which is needle lace, bobbin lace and Carrick Cross lace, as well as learning all about the history of all of the other laces. So what happened during that time there, while I was sitting there continuously making these tiny stitches that you could barely see, I realised something really important, and that was that this process was so important. It was so significant. And in these tiny little stitches, it contained so much history that just went back. And if people didn't kind of learn these stitches, it was going to die off. So I kind of felt a responsibility to preserve it. So after my 4 months in Kenmare, I went back to NCAD to finish my degree. And at that point then, I kind of started to question myself. Why did I feel like I had to make work based on lace, and why couldn't I make work using lace processes? So that basically was the thought behind my own practice, and that was really the start, the beginning of kind of where I got to today. So during that, I was preparing for my degree. I was looking at a small area of farmland on the Beara Peninsula where my dad comes from, and where I spent a huge amount of time as a child. And I was researching lots of different old maps and stuff like that. And I became fascinated by all the different place names of all the different fields on that particular piece of land, which is really, really remote. My uncle used to farm it. He no longer farms it. And it occurred to me that all of these place names were going to die off. These words, these descriptions of this area, this farmland was never going to be used again because nobody was farming it. So my work for my degree show was based on that. I got copies of the maps of the farmland, and I started tracing out the map, and then I was making small little lace pieces to kind of represent the different field areas, and each of the pieces were called something, were called one of the names of the fields, if that makes sense. So this was kind of a spin-off of that work. It's called Divisions. It was about this big, kind of in a little display case. And this was pretty significant at the time because I entered it into the RDS craft competition, and I won the RDS graduate prize that year. So that was great in 2013 when I finished, to kind of have that as a boost to kind of continue with this. So I decided at that point that I was going to move back down to West Cork, and I was going to start my little lace business. And I was really trying to think of how could I earn a living? Like how could I use this craft, continue to take the skills, preserve these skills, but also kind of push it a little bit farther. And I had this idea that if I could make like small little landscapes. I used to be a painter. I worked as a painter for 10 years before I started making lace. So I kind of decided to take those skills through to the lace making. And if I could combine my skills as a painter with the skills as a lace maker, and could I make these small little landscapes? So this was my idea. I would make these small little two-dimensional kind of pieces of Ireland and frame them, and then try and sell them in galleries and design shops around the country. So I did this for about 2 to 3 years, and I made about 4 collections. So this is called the Woodland Collection. Can people see this okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got the framed piece here, and then we've just got the detail of the little tree, and this is called the Little Oak Tree. So with this, I combined 2 styles of lace, Carrick Cross lace and needle lace. So the tree is made from needle lace because that is the smallest and most time-consuming element. And then of course Carrick Cross, in theory, you make it quicker and you can make it bigger because you're using a machine-made net. So I felt that this would be appropriate to make the background the larger piece. So I combined the 2 styles, and then I started to play around with colour. So all of the lace I've ever made has been in white, apart from this one over here. So I started to insert colour from the back. So once the lace was made, I cut a little slit in the back of it and stenciled out kind of the shape of the tree in green and then stuck it in. And then behind that again, I'd have the blue for the sky and the foreground here. And there's these very subtle tonal differences because here we've got some organdy and here there's no organdy. And of course that's the process of making Carrick Cross lace, cutting away organdy that you don't need. So I was able to kind of create these tonal qualities as well. So this was from my woodland collection, which basically looked at native Irish trees and flowers. We then move on to the farmyard collection. So I was living down in West Cork, you know, I was just looking out the window and basically taking inspiration from what I was seeing. And there was this sheep that kind of wandered into kind of my driveway that got lost from its flock and it hung out just outside my door for months on end. So this is called The Lost Sheep and it's based on that sheep, which the farmer did take away at some point, but I'm sure wherever it is, it's really happy at the minute. So this is my little sheep. I entered that into the RDS craft competition again in 2015, I think it was, the date's on, or 2014. And that won the Traditional Lace Makers of Ireland Award. So that was great again. I had a great run with the RDS for a few years after I left college. So the farmyard collection, this is another little one which I just absolutely love. I don't know why, I just think the simplicity of it just really appeals to me. It's called Fresh Eggs. So you've got your little goose here and you probably can't see it from where you're sitting, but if you look closely here, and you're welcome to go up and have a look at the screen afterwards, you'll just see the little silhouette of the eggs. So the little goose is delighted with itself for laying the eggs. And that of course is part of the farmyard collection as well. This one was a little bit more experimental. I really wanted to kind of not just experiment with my composition in lace, but also experiment with the stitches. So I made this piece, and again, it was based on kind of a trip that I'd made to Jersey Island, just off the southwest coast, which is accessible only by cable car, and it's got a population of 2 people. Fascinating place. So this is called the Deserted Cottage. So right in the centre of all the little stitches, you see this tiny little deserted cottage. But what was interesting about this is I started to experiment with my own stitches. So this little stitch over here in this section was me playing around with my own stitches. All of the other stitches would have been the stitches that I learned in Kenmare. So in theory, if you learn 9 stitches of needle lace, you can kind of go and do whatever you want after that. So I kind of took that to heart and did whatever I want after that. And I also started to embroider into this section here as well, so I made the stitching and then embroidered on top of it just to give that extra kind of tonal quality. So this in 2014 I won a National Craft Award and also the Eleanor de la Branchardier Prize, which was a specific lace prize, part of the RDS Awards in 2014. This one is part of the Island collection. So you've got the woodland, the farmland, the island, and then this one here is called Summer at Nana's, which of course is all about my summers at my Nana's. So this is called Stepping Stones here. It might be quite pale, but again, you can come up and have a look and flick through afterwards. But it's basically just me and my sister on stepping stones, and that was what we did on our summer holidays. We just ran out and played. We'd be gone all day and there'd be no parents around, and it was totally safe and acceptable for children to do that back then. These are very, very happy memories for me and something that I just really wanted to represent. So this was from Summer at Nana's. And that's kind of the end of that. We're talking about kind of 2016 here. And I then took a full-time job in Dublin. And while I was still very much involved in lace, I was traveling and doing talks and demonstrations and workshops and attending different events and stuff like that. I went to the World Lace Congress in Bruges in 2018 and did some courses, which was fantastic. I wasn't making work. And then in 2019, after kind of a 3-year break, I quit my job and went back to study and did an MA. So this was part of my master's project. So this piece is called Fragile Economies, and basically at the time I was looking at women's industry and kind of how women in the late 19th and early 20th centuries made themselves self-sufficient, but also found a way of having some kind of independence at a time when they had very little independence. and you know, at a time where they didn't even have the right to vote. So I was looking namely at the lace making industry, but then also kind of branching out a little bit. And then I discovered poultry keeping was a massive industry for women at that time. And it was a massive industry for women right up into the 1970s. So obviously women at home were able to keep chickens, but they could also make money from the eggs that they were selling. And it's fascinating just hearing the different kind of stories. So there used to be these wars between women, like fighting over the eggs. If the chicken wandered off into somebody else's field and laid the eggs, it's like who owns the eggs, you know? So this I thought was fascinating, but also it was an opportunity for women to kind of move up a little bit, because if you became a poultry inspector, this was a great job and it was pensionable and you got to travel and you got to do all these things. So I mean, I just found all of this really fascinating. So I kind of was looking at these two industries, and this was where my research was taking me. And I had loads of ideas at the time about what I was going to do and where it was going to go. I started this in September 2019, and then of course in March 2020 COVID hit, and I found myself at home every day and not able to leave the house. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm looking at. What do I have? Eggshells. So this piece, 21 eggshells, and they each have a needle lace piece that was specifically designed to the contour of each shell. So I made a drawing around the contour of each shell, which then allowed me to make a pattern for the lace, make the lace, and then attach the lace to the shell. And it's the most delicate work that I've ever made. I did think lace was the most delicate work you could ever work with, but actually eggshells, you know. And you can see from this one here, like when I was trying to attach the lace, I dropped it and it broke. So there was a few little accidents like that, which were like, oh, you know, because you can't, just like you can't replicate the eggshell again, but you also can't replicate the piece of lace that you've made for that specific eggshell. So yeah. This is just a detail. So I had the 21 shells and I was playing around a lot with arrangements, how they could be displayed. And then of course, once I started to photograph it, this was a professional shoot. I didn't take these photographs, but the shadows of course became really important then. So now I'm really interested in kind of projecting light through the lace and looking at the shadow, and for that shadow being part of it as well. Then we move on to this piece then, which is called, it's called In Memoriam, not a final name, it's still in progress over here. It's been made to commemorate the 796 babies found in a septic tank in Tuam. So it's mourning lace, so it's made in black. So we have the pattern here, which was hand drawn, and then the lace extends out behind it. So once I get to the end of this piece of paper here, the lace will be finished, but there is more work to be done to it. It's still kind of very much in progress. But this was the first piece of bobbin lace that I was able to design and make myself. I started making this in around 2021. I had been making bobbin lace for 9 years, and it was only then that I was able to kind of make bobbin lace by myself. Up until then I needed to have a teacher beside me because I found bobbin lace incredibly complicated. But I did 2 online courses with a lace maker and artist called Pierre Fouché. And after that, I kind of developed the skill I needed to be able to design bobbin lace and make it myself comfortably. So yeah, we'll watch this space for that one. So this is In Memoriam, still unfinished, still undecided, still in progress. It has travelled around quite a lot, actually, this piece. It was on display in Sligo last year as part of Corge Arts Festival. It was in a window here. It's also been in the National Gallery with me on residency for 2 weeks in July. In May, it was in Montreal at a symposium. So it has travelled quite a bit. And there's a part of me that's kind of like, if I finish it, then what do I do? You know, what do I have to show then? Pardon?
Start another one.
Start another one, exactly. Okay, so this is kind of my most recent work. And this is what I finished my MA in 2021, so I would have kind of started this work after that. This was one of my mother's plates. So when my mother died, I got all of her plates and cutlery and stuff like that. And I don't know whether or not you came from a home where you had like a good room with a good press, and inside the good press had all the good cups and the good plates and the good cutlery that was never used. apart from like once a year at Christmas. So I got all that stuff and I was like, what am I going to do with it? So I kind of just decided I was going to use it because, you know, why not? So anyway, I had always wanted to look at how I could combine lace with pottery or ceramic. And my MA with the eggshells, that was my plan. But when COVID happened, everything closed, so I just couldn't really explore that. So when COVID finished, this idea was still in my head. And we were down, myself and my husband were down in West Cork, and he was washing the dishes and broke the plate. And I was like, no. But I kind of just immediately just said, don't throw it out, I'm going to use it. And I had always had this idea of connecting lace and pottery. And does anybody know about kintsugi?
Yes.
Yeah. So kintsugi is a Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold. So if something cracks, they stick it all back together and they use gold to kind of stick it back together. So the repair becomes part of the object itself, and it extends the story of the object and it becomes part of that story. And there's something really beautiful about that, in my opinion, because obviously there's so much history and story to this bowl because it belonged to my mother. And I don't even know where she got it from. I think it was a wedding present. So in that in itself, there's another story. You know, there's just so much history with it. So I decided I would see if it was going to be possible. So I got some Tech 7, which is this like industrial glue. There's nothing delicate about it. And I stuck the bowl back together and there was a piece missing. So I drew out a little design, a little pattern for that piece, and I made a piece of needle lace to see would it work. So it's kind of in the light up there. It mightn't be clear for you guys to see it. But anyway, it worked quite well and I was pretty happy with it. So that kind of set me on a new kind of trajectory. So I then found this little bowl. So the way I kind of inherited all my mother's bowls and stuff, my husband inherited all of his mother's after she died. So she had this beautiful little set, and this one of course broke. So again, I glued it all back together and there was a couple of missing pieces, and then I was like, I wonder could I add a little bit of colour. I've never used colour in lace. I've always made lace in white thread. But this thread, this kind of beigey thread, was actually from my mother's lace box. So my sister had a couple of boxes belonging to my mum, sewing boxes, and they were her lace boxes. So when I got them, they were full of threads and tools, little bits of lace that I'd never had. So this was like a huge gift to get, you know, in your kind of late 30s, early 40s. You know what I mean? It was considering I'd never had that kind of interest in lace as a child. So I used that thread, and then I was trying to find something that would match this green, and finding threads to match colours is really difficult. But I had loads of embroidery thread, and you know the way embroidery thread is 6 strands all kind of wound together? I just took one off it and used it, and then there's a small little bit of gold that's just kind of embroidered into the edge here because that's what's along the plate. So you've got your little bit of needle lace here and your little bit of needle lace here, and the edge of this is outlined with wire. And I should have said that as well with the eggshells. I couched the outline with wire just to make it kind of stand up a little bit. So this would have been the next one from that. This was just one of our own regular kitchen plates that broke. But again, I was just on a bit of a roll now. So like anything that breaks in the house, it's like, don't throw it out, you know. So again, I made a little bit of needle lace for that here. And this is called, and Forever Shall Be. I should have mentioned actually, this piece is called Survival. And this piece is called Till Death Do Us Part. So I had recently just gotten married after I made that as well. So yeah. And this is And Forever Shall Be. So then these pieces here, again, the cutlery kind of fascinated me. My mother's kind of silverware. So I took photographs of it, I did drawings of it, and then I decided to make these kind of life-size cutlery pieces of all of her cutlery. So a knife, a fork, spoon, a dessert spoon, and a knife, a fork, a dessert spoon, and a teaspoon. And they were great, and I loved hanging them up and looking at the shadows. They were really, like, it looked great, but again, it's like, what do you do with that? How do you display that within a gallery context? Do you know what I mean? That's very difficult. So then they were all framed. And they're on these kind of floating frames. So again, if you look closely, you'll actually see the shadow behind it. So they're kind of sandwiched in between two pieces of glass with about 2 inches in front of the backing, and each backing is a different colour. So I did that in collaboration. It wasn't my idea, it was the framer in Dublin who came up with that, so I can't really take credit for it. And as far as I know, that is the last slide of my work. Thank you. Thanks very much. So does anybody have any questions?
How long did it take to do the eggshells?
Months. I don't know. People always ask kind of how long it takes, but it's really hard to kind of put a number on it, because like if you're making lace for kind of 3 or 4 hours, like you get really bad neck pain and shoulder pain, and you kind of have to, so it's hard to kind of, I'd be in the studio all day, but how much of that I'm actually making lace, I don't know. But probably 10 months, I'd say. But you know, that wasn't working on it every day. Like I've been working on this for 2 years. Do you know what I mean? But again, not working on it every day. Doing kind of 8 hours a day. Like I recently did it on a project. I worked with the Clondalkin lace makers. I don't know if did anyone see it on Instagram or on Facebook. We made a replica of the round tower in Clondalkin using crochet lace and copper wire. And I had to work on that quite a lot because there was a deadline, but it was very sore. There was quite a lot of physical pain. So I really, like, when I do things like that, I really do think about those lace makers back in the day who would have been working 8 hours a day and probably not in the best of conditions and probably not with the best of light. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the lace makers would have been employed and they would have worked in factories or in schools, but a lot of them actually worked at home as well. So a lot of them, they would have cycled for hours and hours and hours to get whatever pattern, then cycled back and spent whatever amount of time making the lace in their small little cottages by the fire. You know, and you can imagine like the dirt of these cottages and their hands even, but this lace remained pristine. So it's really like, you really are kind of amazed at how do they manage to do it, you know? Yeah.
Fiona, how do you show your work? Where do you show your work? And how do you know? Do you sell to galleries, or do you do exhibitions? Or
so I have been trying to make a new collection for years. But because like I work as an arts educator as well, so I'm always kind of juggling my arts practice and then arts education work, do you know. So there's quite a lot of that, you know, a lot of just not having time and not getting into the studio, which I'm sure if anyone who has any kind of a studio practice totally understands. But any work that I make, I kind of enter into competitions or open calls. So I've exhibited a good bit, like since I finished my MA in 2021, in various different group exhibitions. And I travelled to Montreal in May, and I don't think I've travelled anywhere else since. I'll be going to Tennessee next year to teach at the IOLI, at the the International Organization of Lace Makers. Their convention is in Tennessee next July, so I'll be going over to that. But usually I would enter my work into open call competitions, group exhibitions, and mostly they're for sale in there. And I've been lucky enough like to sell a bit over the last couple of years, but that's nearly a bad thing as well, because I'm trying to build a collection and then you sell something and then you've got less work, you know. But at the same time, you can't really say no to a sale, you know. Yeah, yeah.
and your original the pieces that you made out of college first, that you had the Farnier collection.
Yeah.
Collection.
Yeah.
Did you wholesale those, or did you?
So again, I was really exploring this at the time, and I was working a lot, like I was living down in the Beara Peninsula, so I was massively isolated, very difficult to kind of make any kind of a living down there. And then of course, if you do need to go anywhere, like if you need to go up to Cork to drop stuff off, or anywhere, if you need to go to Dublin, it's a huge expense in petrol, like it's just huge. So I was down there for probably 3 or 4 years. And then I just had to come back up to Dublin and work. I just didn't have a choice anymore. Like there was a job there that I had to take. But yeah, I was trying to kind of get it into various different places. But the price point wasn't high enough for me, but it was probably too high within the context of where it was. So that was a very difficult thing to navigate. And that's why I kind of moved away from that. And I went back to creating these kind of one-off art pieces, because the idea of just like, oh, it's in a frame and it's going to cost you €500, and like people aren't going to spend the money on it really, you know. Yeah. And not that that's what's important, but I still have rent to pay, and you know, I need to eat food and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It is most definitely a labour of love. Like I have been involved in a lot of projects that basically you just don't get paid for, or what you are getting paid for, like when you work it out as an hourly rate, you don't even want to work it out as an hourly rate. Like you just don't. So there is that, but I mean, there is a part of me as well. It's like I need to earn money here as well, you know. Yeah. Yeah.